So this is a job that I picked up in 2012. I've been a draftsman for 20 years, mainly secondary steel and staircases, architectural and industrial. And for 7 years prior to that, I was a fitter fabricator. Again, mainly stairs and secondary steel work. So when this job came my way, a couple of years after I went self-employed in 2010, the site dimensions that came for the first stair, there's 4 blocks, 26 flights in each block, 12 floors above ground and a couple below. The site sketches that came to me were virtually undecipherable. I spent a day trying to make a start on the job and it just weren't happening. So I got pressured into going down and measuring them myself. Before I went down, I prepared some drawings with the dimensions that I wanted so that I could ensure that all these glass panels, 2 per flight, so we've got 112 flights altogether, 224 panes of glass. It went as smoothly as possible. In the end, there were only 2 glass panels that got rejected, and that's because they were made wrong, not because they were drawn wrong. So I want to discuss the site dimensions that I took and how that's developed into a generic set of sheets that can be applied to pretty much any precast stair. So we'll just come out of this one and go into this one, which is a live job that I'm on with at the moment. This particular course stair has got winders on the arch landings, and I want to discuss how this came about. The current status of this job is that I've just modelled 3 flights in, which have gone off for approval. There's no point doing the entire stair till the architect and the client and my customer are happy what I've come up with. Okay, so how do we get to this stage? Well, the first thing that we do is I get my client to take a set of these to site. I believe this one's void on the right hand when ascending. It would have started off with sheet 1, which is always the top flight. So I always measure from the top down. When I were a fitter, it would fit from the top down, and as a draftsman, I detail from the top down. There's a sheet 1, and there's a last sheet. The last sheet is always the bottom 2 or 1 flight, depending on whether it's got an odd number of flights. Generally, they tend to be equal, but it's not always the case. And then in between, you print off as many of these sheets as you need to measure up the pairs of flights in between the upper 2 and the ground floor or lower 2. And then you just number them accordingly. So if you were to number this as sheet number 2, it would be the 2 flights below the top 2 flights, and so on until you got down to the last sheet. This is sheet 1 for this particular stair that I'm working on, and I just want to quickly go through the dimensions and the information that's on it. So the first thing is always measure with a self-leveling laser. Generally they're about 50mm from the base to your laser line. The guy that measured this up decided to put it on a tripod for some reason, which is why I've added this note, because I ended up with about 4 or 5 different dimensions. Don't put it on a tripod, put it directly onto the tread. It's self-leveling, you end up with the same dimension each time, give or take 1 or 2mm, literally. Okay, so most of these dimensions are self-explanatory. Width across void, nose into back, nose into back, nose into back, top landing, etc. Width on stairs. I like to take a width at the top and the bottom. Void width. What else? I like this one as well, from the wall back to the upper flight, the flight going up. That kind of, if you add this dimension E dimension, it should come to that. If there's any discrepancy, you can flag it up, or if any of the voids seem wider for some reason. I don't want to go too depth into this. You can pretty much see what it is. It's given me an additional dimension here of 2084, which I then knocked off this 1399 to give me the overall over the winder treads, which I then just average out. I don't ask for any angle, don't put an angle finder on it. Definitely do not measure the actual risers. That is terrible practice. You'll just use this B dimension. The A dimension gives you the angle. This is quite critical, B and C. B and C are taken from the same laser point down to the nosing of the bottom flight and the top nosing of the next flight down, and that will cancel out any discrepancies between the height of that one and the height of that one. If you don't do that, you can miss that discrepancy. You can get errors going all the way up your stairs, which will just throw everything out. And when you've got 26 flights, that can be terrible. So this generic survey sheet will accommodate most precast stairs, even if it's got winders in it, whether it's got a tread in there, 3 treads in there, 4 treads in there, even several treads in there, because you've always got room at the side to sketch them. Just a little thing like that. Site bends are taken from RC walls or block walls. In this case it's RC. If it's a finish, I want to know what that finish is. This little bit here allows you to sketch out any variations to a typical one. So sometimes the nosings are set forward of the edge of the void return. And that is pretty much it. Other than to say that this is a very simple to follow, and one sheet progresses onto the next sheet, so you're not constantly flicking back from sheet to sheet trying to tie in one set of dimensions to another set of dimensions. If you draw this one out exactly as it is there, and the next one starts there. It's quite a simple thing to follow, and it's accurate. The lettering, the letters on these dimensions are really, they're just a reference. They don't mean anything other than if I have a query, I can ring up the guy who's measured it and say, can you just check dimension G, for example. If something's not looking right, I can query it and I can take it straight to that dimension. Okay, so once I've received those, the next plan of attack is to draw those stairs out in 2D in AutoCAD. So I'll draw them out in elevation, put all the dimensions on, tick off the dimensions on my site sketches to make sure that this replicates the site sketches. I tend to put a circle around any that throwing up a bit of a wobbly, any that I want to raise a question with the contract manager. Then I'll send this back to the contract manager and say, are you happy with this? Can you please have a look at the circle dimensions? And once we've got them resolved, I can proceed. The other thing that I'll do is I'll draw the plans from the elevation by projecting lines up. That gives me a set of plan views, and then I take a copy of this, make a new DWG, and do what I call a justified survey. And on the justified survey, I find out the average of the void width. In this case, I picked 200. The other thing I will do as well is I'll measure the angle of each stair, put a line from nosing to nosing, find its center point, project a vertical line up to 900 or 1000, depending on what the height of the rail is going to be, in this case 900. And then I put in another line, not an offset of that one, it's put into the average of the angle. If I've got a wide range of angles, I tend to try and keep everything within 0.2, 0.25 of a degree. I might end up with a couple of different angles. I try and replicate as much as I can within reason. And then what happens in reality is that, let's say your shadow rail is, I don't know, 50 mil from this, in theory, 50 mil from the throat of the stair. You might find that it ends up being 60 there and 40 at the top, depending on which way the angle goes. But what that does is it allows the shop floor to use as fewer jigs as possible for fabrication. And it allows me to just copy down, copy down, copy down, copy down. And that's the whole point of these as well. If these are all different widths, you've got no way of knowing which way they are varying from left to right. So the easiest thing to do is just average them out and work with that. And the same for the width of the stairs. Because this is a powder coated job, you're not going to send them as that. They're going to be a first fix to some extent. So once that's created, I'll bring in that DWG, that justified survey, and I basically trace it in 3D. I do all my stairs manually. I don't use any of the checklist macros. They just haven't got enough control. It does things behind your back. It rarely fits real life situations, so I prefer to model everything manually. Okay, so once they're all done, I've got my fixed positions. If anything gets moved accidentally, I can see it at a glance. I don't have to have loads and loads and loads of construction lines on, which gets pretty messy when you're putting construction lines in. I prefer to work without them as much as possible for these kind of jobs and just use this line as my reference point. They also create individual plan views, so I can drop them on top if necessary. I probably didn't need them for this one. Oh, I did need them for this one, for the winders, for working out where the winders go. And then from there on, I can start modelling my staircase. So if anybody would like copies of these, we've got a left and a right hand version. Just email me and I'll gladly send you these PDFs over. Thank you for watching.